All right, everybody, welcome back to Graduate Statistics. That's our week 13, and this is our video lecture 3. We're doing multiple regression, and at the moment, we're exploring this problem. We're trying to predict poverty rate in U.S. states. And we have here our response variable, poverty. This is an exploratory plot where we're seeing bivariate correlations and in both numbers and scatter plots. Between poverty and candidate predictors, percentage of people in metropolitan residing in metropolitan regions of the state, percentage of white people in the state, percentage of high school graduates in the state, and percentage of females that are heads of households. Now, when we observe these plots, we're doing this to determine whether the variables that we believe are predictors of poverty, whether they relate on a one-to-one basis with poverty. We explored already the relationship between poverty and percentage of high school graduates individually. Now we're going to look at another one and then start building our model. So the first variable that we'll introduce to our model is the percentage of females that are heads of households in the state and poverty. And here's the relationship that we want to look at. That's the scatter plot. Shows a positive relationship. And if we look here, it's a positive and moderate relationship of 0.53. So we'll start the model with that variable. So let's look at that here. Predicting poverty from percent female householder. So if you look at the model, we're doing, this is just simple regression, right, to begin with. So we're having poverty rate here in states of the United States. Poverty is our response variable, and we have percent female in households as the dependent or as the explanatory variable, and then the data set called states. And here is the output of the model. This variable alone, female household, we see a multiple R-square of about 0.27. So 0.27% of the variance, that's R-squared. That's squaring that 0.5 something that we saw before. So it's about, explains about 30% of the variance in poverty. And it has, the estimate is positive, meaning that for each percent increase in the number of females, in the percentage of females, for each percentage increase in females head of households in the state, you get an increase in poverty rate of 0.69. And that predictor is significant as expected because the model is significant and we have just one predictor. Now, let's interpret these estimates. Now I'm isolating that particular scatter plot from the big plot. We see that R is 0.53, R squared 0.28. We see a positive relationship that's not super duper strong. You can see the spread of points around that line is quite a bit. So you don't have a 0.9 relationship, kind of like the volume and the weight, but still considerable relationship. And here are the estimates of the model that we saw before, right? So we have the coefficient of 0.69, and it is, we can conclude with confidence that it's not likely to see this particular coefficient under the null hypothesis that that coefficient would be 0, because the probability of seeing a coefficient of 0 is really, really tiny. Now let's predict poverty from percent female householder and percent white. If we go back to the figure again, we can see the relationship between poverty and percent white here. So you can see that there is a negative relationship there, it seems, where the more concentration of white individuals in the state, the smaller the poverty rate. Let's look at the coefficient. It's a negative coefficient of 0.31. This is a statistically reliable coefficient. It's not showing here. I'll show you how you get the significance when we are in the lab, not with this data set, but other data sets. But it is a significant relationship between percent female, percent white people in a region and poverty. But now, sorry, don't worry about these. Let's go back. Now we're going to add that to the model. Instead of just having percent female in households and percent white, we have both of them in the model. Okay, same data set. Now what we see is that while percent of females head of households continues to be significant, the contribution of having more white people in a state to poverty is no longer significant when you when you fix the number of females that are heads of households. So it's no guarantee that if you have a bivariate relationship between, say, a predictor and a response variable, that it will continue to be significant in the model when you control for some other variable but that might be related to it. So if we pull out the ANOVA, we can see that the model is as a whole. So ANOVA estimates, I'm sorry, we have that contribution of percent females in the household is significant, just like with the T, and the percent whites is not significant. And R squared can be calculated by the amount of variance that is explained, the sums of squares here, of the pieces that are explained by the model, over the total amount of variance to be explained, right? So the R square of the full model is 0.29. Remember that with only percent females as heads of households, it already was explained 0.28. So adding this other variable did not improve the amount of explanatory power of the model. So again, the R square adjusted, if we have just percent females as head of households, it already explained 0.28 or 28% of the variance in poverty. When we add percent white, it only increased by 1 percentage point. And if you look at the adjusted R squares that adjust by the number of variables in the model, it doesn't change. It's like, well, you added a variable, sure, it will increase a little bit, but if you correct by the fact that you have two variables, you have pretty much no gain. So that's the benefit of looking at adjusted R square. So when any variable gets added to the model, really, R square increases. They're bound to have some relationship, but if the added variable doesn't really improve, doesn't really provide any new information, or is completely unrelated, adjusted R square does not increase. Now here's what I want to highlight to you, and I want you to pay close attention. When we looked at the relationship between the percentage of white individuals living in a state and poverty, we saw a negative relationship of 0.31. And I told you that that relationship is statistically reliable. So it tells us that white is a predictor of poverty when I look only into these two variables, right? Now, what happened when we put white into a model where female household variable was already there? It didn't add any contribution to the model. After controlling for the other variable that was already in there, right? It didn't explain poverty over and above what the variable female house explained, right? So this is interesting because what happens when you do multiple regression is not simply whatever I see in bivariate correlations, I'll see there. What multiple regression does is that it provides the unique contribution of each one of the predictors. while controlling for the effect of other predictors in the model, right? So it's assessing the effect of whiteness in a state, the impact of the amount of white people in the state, I should say, after controlling for the percent of households that have females as heads, right? So it's after controlling for that effect. Let's see if there is any leftover thing that can be explained by the percent white people in the region. Same thing when I look at the percent of females that are heads of households. When I look at how much it explains, when it is in the model with a different variable, it is telling me how much it explains after controlling by the amount of white people in the state, right? And it does so because it controls for the covariation between these two variables. So watch the relationship, how strong it is between the amount of white people in the region and the percentage females that are heads of households. It's a negative relationship. So it's a negative relationship, I'll repeat, and it's telling us, so percent female household is in this axis and white, percent of white is in the y-axis. So it's telling us that the smaller the number of females in a household, the larger the percent white people in the population of that state. And to the contrary, the smaller the number of white people in the state, the higher the number of females that are heads of households. Now let's look at the R coefficient. Here's white and here's female. So I'm looking at this negative 0.75 correlation between these two variables. So it's a pretty strong correlation, right? Between how many white people are there in a particular state and the number of females that are heads of households. Now, an anti-racist interpretation of this, because we're seeing a disparity, right? We're seeing an inequity here. You have more females that are heads of households in states that are populated more significantly by, or less populated by white people. And we have less females heads of households alone that are the sole breadwinner, only female. It's not that we're not counting houses that have two females as households, household heads, right? As just one female breadwinner in a household. That's less frequent in societies and in states that are more populated by white people. And we have more of that situation where you have just one female as the head of a household when there are less white folks, more people that are not white in that population. Well, an anti-racist interpretation to that disparity would not say something, would not explain that disparity based on something that is about the people, right? It's nothing about being black that results in this. It's nothing about being white that results in this. It's something about how our society is structured that favors that kind of situation where a female is found alone heading a household, right? It's happening more to societies that have less white people. Why might that be? Well, black folks and Latino individuals are more likely, especially men, are more likely to be arrested for similar crimes than white individuals. So this may be a reason why you have more females left alone in a household with a family to support by themselves. So it kind of makes sense that after I fix the amount of white people in a state, I continue to see an impact of poverty by varying the amount of percent females that are heads of households, that are alone, working and getting money to bring to that family. Then if I fix the amount of females that are heads of households alone, and I vary the amount of white people, no further impact on poverty, right? It's not so much about having white or black people in the state, but what race does to the dynamics of our society that ends up leaving females alone in a household to take care of a family, right? So this is what the model tells us. So regression, what it does, like putting in the most simplest of terms, what it does, it fixes one variable and it lets the other vary basically and see if by varying the other in a fixed level of, let's put it concretely, if I fix the number of white people, so I'm controlling for it, I let it fix at a level, and I vary the amount of females that are alone, like one breadwinner, I vary that one variable, I still see an impact on poverty. When I fix the number of females that are heads of households, and I let the amount of white people vary in a state, that doesn't relate to poverty once this is controlled for. So we saw a relationship here because when I watch things correlate by, in a bivariate kind of way, I'm not controlling for anything else, right? So there is a relationship, but once I control for an additional variable that is related to the number of white people in that state, which percent female in the household is, then you begin to see what is the real contributor to that response variable. So I think it was an interesting data set and an exercise of making an interpretation that's just an interpretation that I made. You can see how criminal justice is not in this data set, but when we see a disparity like this that is related to race, an anti-racist interpretation would lead us to find factors that are related to the structure of our society, to policies and rules and ideas that are leading to that disparity, and not something that is about the color of people's skin. There's nothing about being Black that will make you be the sole head of household. That's an anti-racist position. So let's see what are the data in other studies that allows us to understand that disparity in terms of rules and policies and ideas in our society. All right? So when we come back, we'll continue to explore multiple regression with other examples. See you then. Bye-bye.